Is toxic masculinity a real thing? If so, what is it and what should we do about it? Well, this is kind of what makes it a difficult topic because different people can use this term in different ways. As Catholic Christians, we actually understand masculinity and gender for that matter to be primarily rooted in biology and in nature. This is sometimes what distinguishes or differentiates a non-Catholic or non-Christian perspective on masculinity and gender, and that oftentimes a secular culture can view masculinity and gender as being merely the construct of a sociological and cultural phenomenon. But as Catholics, we do not believe that masculinity or gender are primarily rooted in those sociological or cultural factors, but rather our nature and our biology. Certainly, sociological and cultural factors can influence and impact and affect masculinity and gender over time. Men in the 1400s France perhaps had a slightly different understanding and way of living masculinity than Native Americans in the 1800s. But aside from those factors, certainly, it's primarily something rooted in nature and in biology. So this is really key when we seek to understand toxic masculinity, because it's going to be taking certain strengths that come more naturally for men, and it's going to weaponize them. So what might some of those strengths be for men? Well, I'll just mention one, and it's simply that: strength. Particularly strength of the body. Many other kinds of strength, but strength of body especially is one of those perhaps more natural or inherent qualities that comes with being a man and masculinity. So for example, biologically, men have about 35 or 36% more muscle mass and density than women. This is a proven fact, especially over time and in history. Because of that fact of more muscle mass and density, perhaps it's one of the influencing factors for men in masculinity having a greater propensity to risk-taking behavior, to being fighters in wars, to being protectors of others. So these are some of the qualities or traits of strength that come with being a man. Now, when it comes to toxic masculinity, perhaps a decent definition of toxic masculinity is this: it is the weaponization of certain strengths associated with masculinity, especially physical strength, to the detriment of others. Now, for a brief moment, women have natural strengths or inherent strengths to being women and femininity, and they can actually weaponize those things. Women, for example, can have usually a greater emotional intelligence and an ability to receive others in a relational way. So you can weaponize that by becoming emotionally manipulative and psychologically controlling. Perhaps that could be epitomized by the movie Mean Girls. This could be a really good example of toxic femininity. For toxic masculinity, what might be the epitomization of that look like? Perhaps just simply put, it's rape or rape culture. This would be an example of violent sexual aggression, of utilizing one's strengths over and against another to their demise, to their detriment, etc. So toxic masculinity would be the normalization of this sort of behavior. It's kind of like in the little phrases of, oh, well, boys will be boys, or men will be men. It's the normalization of the weaponization of certain strengths that come from men, physical strength example, and yet it's the normalization of weaponizing their natural God-given gifts. So what might actually authentic masculinity look like? Perhaps in the person of Jesus himself, who gives the best example or definition for authentic masculinity. Jesus says in Matthew's gospel, "I am meek and humble of heart." He's meek. Perhaps we could say this is true masculinity. It's meekness. Now, meekness is not weakness, nor is it mousiness. Rather, meekness means great strength under control. Think about like a wild stallion with all its ferocity, all of its natural propensity, all of its strength. And then when you take a wild stallion with all those strengths and then you break it in, or you break a horse in, and now it's under control. It still has all of those natural strengths, but now it's harnessed. It's under the dominion of something controlling it. It hasn't lost anything of its strength yet. This is really key to understand, one, who Jesus is, because he's the authentic man. He's the epitome of authentic masculinity. And he himself defines himself as someone who's meek, great strength, but it's under control. This is really key for men to have a key example of what does this look like. We never want to apologize for our strengths. This is something where the secular culture can kind of hijack authentic masculinity and view it as toxic simply because we're men, simply because we have strength. So men should never apologize for our strengths. Rather, we want to have all those strengths and actually grow in strength, strength of character, strength of body, strength of emotions. But we want to have all that strength under control. Under the control of what? Under the control of right reason and under the control of, ultimately, of the authority of God. We want to be under the authority of God. We want to be able to take these natural God-given characteristics and strengths to be fighters, to be protectors, to have like that natural propensity to risk-taking behavior. And yet we want to have that subservient to love. We want to have that subservient to lifting up and upholding the dignity of others. So hopefully this helps us not just to avoid toxic masculinity, but also as something to press forward to. Authentic masculinity epitomized in the heart and person of Jesus Christ. God bless you.